Good day and welcome to SCO BRICS Insight, where we bring you the latest news, information and analysis. Now, today I want to talk to you about sanctions. When historians and economists in the future look back at the history of the EU, and particularly the European Commission, they're going to look at the decisions they made in the years in the run-up to 2022, particularly their all-out move to cut the use of fossil fuels, and that focus on renewable energy before all the relevant technology was available to make it viable. And then, of course, to completely stop the purchase of Russian fossil fuels, particularly gas. Now, it was said by the European Commission that they wanted to reduce their dependence on Russian pipeline gas. That was an interesting statement, as Russian pipeline gas actually made up only about 35% of its actual gas supplies. I mean, it had other sources such as Algeria and Norway also providing gas supplies, plus LNG shipments from various parts of the world. Yeah, the major advantage of Russian pipeline gas was its reliability of supply and the ability for the volume to be increased in times of shortages. All Gazprom had to do was increase the volume that it sent. It's also cost efficient, the price of gas fixed along with long-term contracts, which benefited both parties and were not subject to the wild fluctuation prices of the spot market. Plus, Gazprom in Russia had been a very reliable supplier going back to the days of the Soviet Union. I mean, the building of Nord Stream and then Nord Stream 2 in partnership between Gazprom and five European energy suppliers ensured that the new energy supply routes were available to replace the old pipelines that had been around since the Soviet time and were more environmentally friendly. Well, the situation changed in 2014 when the US organised its coup in the Ukraine to try and take the Crimea from Russia and then surround it. Not long after that the US started to state that Europe was too dependent on Russian gas while Russia was its enemy. I mean, the US had bases in NATO bases in Europe to defend it from Russian aggression, and it should cease buying Russian gas because it was an enemy and looking to invade it. I mean, this is also when the US decided that, Nord Stream pipelines had to go and they were a way for Europe to backslide and have second thoughts about abandoning Russian gas. So they carried out the biggest industrial sabotage in history, and they claim they don't know who did it. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, the US has had bases in Europe, not to defend Europe, but make sure it's close enough to Europe to cause problems. I mean, let's not forget that in 1990, the Soviets agreed to German unification and withdrew all their military bases, not only from East Germany, but from all Eastern Europe and the Baltic states. Now remember, the Baltic states were actually part of the Soviet Union. I mean, did the US pack up its bases in Germany, which they'd been occupying since 1945? No, they reinforced them through the 90s and the 2000s, expanded the so-called NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is actually just a puppet of the US, with bases into more and more countries right up to the borders of Russia. Now they're telling the countries of the European Union that this reliable energy supplier since the days of the Soviet Union was about to attack them and they should stop trading with one of their largest partners. Of course, if they decided to stop buying cheap Russian pipeline gas, then Europe would be able to buy from the US the freedom molecules of its LNG at around 3 times the price. They would then have to build expensive regasification terminals to accommodate the tankers supplying the gas and compete with the Asian markets where gas prices are high. So the EU went along with this scenario, and all it caused was huge increases in price for the gas, the knock-on effects which turned out to be high energy costs, a massive increase in prices of food, and industries not be able to compete in world markets as their products were not competitive. It's also caused inflation, a drop in living standards, civil unrest, and an increase in unemployment. Also, the US is not exactly a reliable supplier, as if and when the gas price goes higher in Asia, it has a tendency to send the cargoes there rather than in Europe because it makes more money. So, the US managed to get the European Commission to give up the supplies of a major and reliable supplier on the promise of an ally that can actually wants to destroy economically and prevent it becoming a competitor. Russia's obviously seen through all these charades and understands the game being played by the US. But the EU, led by failed politicians on the instructions of the globalists, think they're pursuing a path for eco-nirvana and not economic extinction. Russia didn't actually make that much money from selling pipeline gas. Most of it was sold on long-term contracts, and the majority of the time the price difference of pipeline gas and LNG was huge. The major problem for the EU is once you stop having the supply of cheap and reliable pipeline gas, you're at the mercy of the spot market and the speculators. Right? That means the pipeline gas can be whatever those who control it want it to be. If you cannot turn on the tap of pipeline gas, then you're subjected to the dreaded market of supply and demand. This is where the EU now faces the dilemmas of that. Every time there's a cold snap or a major incident or an accident like in Norway, prices rocket, demand increases and supplies become difficult to source. Now, does Russia care? Well, it still sells around 40 billion cubic meters of gas via pipeline through the Ukraine transit system and the Turkish Stream pipeline. It's around 70% less than it used to supply. Well, the price it gets is better, plus it's selling LNG to Europe, whatever the EU says, so it's not got rid of Russian gas. So the US has succeeded in destroying the economic capabilities of the EU and convinced that it's for their own good and the benefit of mankind and the environment. It's hard not to laugh, isn't it? Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and if you've enjoyed this video, you could help me out and help me fund the channel by and the website SCOBRICSinsight.com by clicking on the thanks button at the bottom of the screen. Thank you, take care, and I'll see you all again soon.